Hi, folks. This is Harold Ree of the Pawprint Animal Rescue Podcast. Just wanted to let you know that in this episode, Peter Zheutlin mentions a YouCaring website to help Greg Mahle purchase a new truck. Greg Mahle also mentions this on episode 9. If you go to that YouCaring website, you'll see that it's currently closed, and for good reason. They were able to reach their goal, and you'll see Greg Mahle in the coming weeks and months driving a newer and, more importantly, safer tractor-trailer to transport more dogs in the future. Thanks, and on to the show. This is Pawprint, an animal rescue community, episode 11. I'm Harold Ree.
I'm Nancy Ree.
Today's guest is the talented Peter Zheutlin, author of the New York Times and Amazon best-selling book, Rescue Road, a book inspired by Greg Mahle, who was a guest on this program on episode 9.
So Peter found out about Greg when he ended up adopting one of the dogs that Greg transported.
He decided to actually join Greg on one of his road trips. We asked Peter about life on the road with Greg Mahle, his observations on animal rescue, as well as reflections on the writer's life. Next, if you want to learn more about Peter Zheutlin and his book, Rescue Road, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/11. That's the number 11.
I'm a lapsed lawyer, actually. Like many people who go into law as their first career, they end up doing something else. And for the past 20 years or so, I've been a freelance writer and a freelance journalist. I do have a little bit of a private practice, mainly working with nonprofits, helping them with communications and editorial work. But my real passion of late has been writing books.
We're meeting today to talk about your latest book, Rescue Road. I'll just give you my 5-second review. Great book. I was moved to tears. So that's my quick review.
Thank you. Some people say I was moved to tears by your book, and I say I hope it's not the writing. But it is a book, I think, that speaks to the hearts of a lot of people. It's a book that's filled in some ways with sadness, but also with a lot of happy endings. So I've heard that a lot. It's a book that packs an emotional punch.
Tell us a little bit about how did you get in touch with Greg Mahle, who is the main character of this work, and what did you find interesting about him?
Well, I first learned about Greg Mahle in 2012. That was the year that I finally surrendered to my wife and kids and agreed after 20 years that we could get a family dog. I was utterly unfamiliar with the dog world and really had no idea even how to go about getting a dog. And one day my wife came home from a yoga class, and one of the guys in her yoga class had said that he had recently adopted a rescue dog, and it was the best dog he ever had. And when she said rescue dog, literally the image that popped into my mind was St. Bernards in the Alps with whiskey barrels under their chins. I couldn't really fathom what she meant by a rescue dog.
Right.
And of course, what I learned, of course, is that rescue dogs are mainly dogs that come from shelters or, are saved from bad situations of neglect or abuse, or they're simply lost stray dogs. We worked through a group called Labs for Rescue in Connecticut. And one of the things that surprised me when we finally found the dog that we would adopt, his name is Albie. He's a yellow lab mix. He was about 3 when he came to us, 3 years old. I said, great, when can we go down to Connecticut and pick him up? Which is when I learned that he wasn't in Connecticut. The rescue was in Connecticut, but Albie, like many rescue dogs, which I also found out after the fact, was in Louisiana. He was from down south, and he was going to be coming up on what they called a transport. I really had no concept of what that even meant.
Right.
And while he was in transit, June of 2012, one day my wife, Judy, came running into my office, basically dumped her laptop on my lap and said, look, it's Albie. And there was a Facebook post by Greg Mahle, whose name I didn't even know at the time, with a picture of Albie sitting with him. Albie's paws were on Greg's lap. And Greg had written the most beautiful post about their journey and how they were almost home, how they had just crossed the Mason-Dixon line and were finally in the north. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is not just some truck driver moving animals from A to B. This is a guy who really obviously has a tremendous passion for what he's doing and a great love for the dog. And it was so exciting because we were already very attached to Albie, even though we hadn't met him yet. So Albie came to us. We did not meet Greg when we picked Albie up. It's a little bit complicated, but in Massachusetts where we live, dogs have to go into quarantine for 48 hours if they're coming in through rescue organizations and they're coming in from out of state. I got curious to learn more about Greg because I learned that he drove over 4,000 miles every other week to bring these dogs from the south to the north. And in those early days with Albie, Albie was such a mystery to us. We didn't know anything about his earlier life. But as I was meeting people with dogs as we were taking Albie for walks, I was shocked at how many people up here in New England had dogs from Tennessee or Alabama, Mississippi, or Arkansas. And so I got curious, why were there so many dogs like Albie? And why were they coming north from the south? And it dawned on me that Greg might be a good entry point into this story, so to speak. And I wrote to him, I emailed him. He didn't know me from Adam because I said I was interested in possibly writing a story about what he did. He was a little bit wary. His tractor trailer where he lives half of his life is a very private little world. It's just him and one other driver. And I was, in a sense, inviting myself into his home. But I persuaded him to let me come down and spend the night with him a Friday night in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is where he stops every other Friday night, night before the dogs are dropped off in New England. And I got the assignment from Parade Magazine. And I flew down to Allentown, spent the night with Greg in the trailer with the dogs, and helped him do the drop-offs the next day. It was just so moving. And with my wife's encouragement, that article in Parade evolved into the book.
What was most moving about that, just spending that short time with Greg and the dogs?
Well, part of it was that he was so eloquent and simply poetic when he talked about the work that he did. I would ask him questions, and there would often be very long pauses. And then he would spill out some beautiful paragraphs that just, they weren't rehearsed, but they were clearly reflected what this work meant to him and how much joy he got from it and how devoted he was to the dogs in his care. That was part of it. And part of it was also the next day at the stops in Connecticut, in particular in New York, where people were waiting for their dogs. Greg makes great use of Facebook. We were able to follow Albie's journey, and he encourages people to bring their welcome signs, and he really builds the excitement. And to see the pure joy of people greeting these dogs and thinking about what it meant for the dogs, because every dog that is lucky enough to get to Greg's truck has beaten incredible odds to get there. Albie, for example, was in a shelter where 90% of the 3,500 dogs a year that come in are euthanized. Many shelters across the South euthanize huge numbers of dogs because the overpopulation problem is so severe. So each of these dogs, these are the underdogs, they're the strays, they're the throwaways, the discards, the abused, the neglected, the maligned, and they're so lucky to be on that truck,
right,
headed to a forever home. And just seeing these unions just was very moving. In fact, I've been to this, what's called Gotcha Day. That's what they call it, Gotcha Day.
Right.
Many times now. I just bring tissues every time because it's so emotional.
When you observe Gotcha Day, can you maybe describe to people the actual scene?
Give you an example. One of the busiest stops tends to be Putnam, Connecticut, in northeastern Connecticut. And we pulled in that day, and there were about 24 people or more, kids, older folks, signs waving, people just sort of, you could just see when the truck pulls in, all of a sudden, people who've been standing around waiting become almost hyper alert and excited. And we pulled in, and I'll never forget, this was the first time I ever traveled with Greg. He just paused before he got out of the truck, and he said to me, a few days ago, these dogs were all going to die. And now the doors are going to open up, the light's going to flood in, and each of these dogs is going to be delivered into the loving arms of a forever family. This is heaven. And I think he meant not just heaven for the dogs, but also his own personal heaven. Then he bounds out of the truck with just tremendous enthusiasm and greets everyone. And he'll say something to the effect that, I know you've all been waiting a long time for these guys, but these guys have been waiting a whole lifetime to meet you. And then he opened the trailer doors and the dogs start to bark. There's a lot of excitement. And people will line up. He'll ask for the name of the dog you're picking up. And let's say it's Albie, for example, like our dog. He'll get Albie from the kennel, and he's got Albie in his arms, and he'll hold Albie up, even if he weighs 70 pounds, and say, Albie. And everybody claps. And there's just this sort of presentation and enthusiasm that he goes through each time. And this is at the end of an extremely stressful, difficult 7 days on the road with little sleep. And it is a very stressful, physically demanding job. And his enthusiasm is always so high. Even if he's had a breakdown that's cost him $1,000 to fix the day before, he never lets any of that dampen his enthusiasm when those people are waiting for their dogs. So each dog comes off excited, and the families, many are crying, and the kids are hugging their new dogs and taking them off into the nearby field to walk. It's almost something you have to see or truly appreciate. I tried to paint the picture in the book so that people could get a sense of how powerfully emotional the day is.
Wow. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. You did a great job of painting that picture. I got chills just thinking about it. When you wrote the magazine article for Parade Magazine, what was the initial response to the article that you received?
Good question. When they ran the article, and the articles are quite short, in Parade, there was a little tag at the end that says, if you have a rescue dog, go to our Facebook page. This is the Parade Magazine Facebook page, and post a picture of your rescue dog. I noticed that a lot of people were starting to post pictures. So about a week after the article ran, in March of 2014, I called the social media editor of Parade, and I said, I'm just curious to know, when you ask people to go on your Facebook page and respond to an article, what's the typical response? She said, well, usually we'll get 75 to 100 people. And Parade was a very widely distributed magazine. It goes to millions of newspaper subscribers. She said 75 to 100. And I said, well, how many have you gotten on this story? And this was about a week out. She said 1,100. I said, wow. That's when I knew that there was something about this story that was going to resonate with a lot of people.
That's right.
For someone like me, what I realized that here I was, a sort of a rescue parent, so to speak. I had a rescue dog, but I knew so little about what it took to get my dog Albie from Louisiana, where he was picked up as a stray, to our home in New England. So many people had to play a role. He had to get so many lucky breaks. And Greg, one of the things he emphasized to me over and over the many thousands of miles we traveled together, he said, look, I'm just a cog in a wheel. I'm just one link in a chain. I'm the person that all these people getting the dog, they're going to associate this experience with me because I'm the person they will meet. I'm the face they will see. And they will always associate getting the dog with me. But there are 100 people before me who have to play their role. And for most adopters, you'll never know the names of all the people who extended their hands and their hearts to your dog to make that gotcha day possible. And I also realized that even as an adopter, how little I knew, which I knew nothing, about why there were so many Southern dogs coming north to find homes. Where you are in California, it's a little different. There is a big stray population in California as well, and many dogs do go usually south to north up to the Pacific Northwest or Colorado.
But a lot do get euthanized. So
yes, a lot do. It's interesting, here in the Northeast over decades, shelters, various private rescue groups that have shelters up here will tell you that they now have excess capacity. Where their shelters were once filled with local dogs, they are now taking dogs from the South because we have been successful over many decades in greatly increasing the rate of spay-neuter. And so there's a lot of demand here for dogs. There's a lot of supply in the South. And we can talk about, why that's true. There's some very complicated and, reasons why this problem is particularly acute in the Deep South. But, I just knew nothing about the scope of this problem, even as an adopter. And so one of the motivations for writing the book was, just as I had sort of educated myself, I hope that other people, whether they had a rescue dog or were thinking of getting a dog, would at least consider a rescue dog. Because there's so many wonderful dogs in shelters down south in need of homes. There's no reason to go to a breeder for a really wonderful, fine dog. When my wife mentioned rescue dog to me, I had a lot of the same misconceptions that a lot of people carry, that shelter dogs were damaged goods. They would be behaviorally unpredictable. They might be more prone to illness. Nothing could be further than the truth. Working with a reputable rescue organization is important, not just taking any dog that happens to come up in a van from the South. You've got to work with a reputable rescue group. But the dogs that come up, a good rescue group will make sure they're temperament tested. I mean, no, there's no guarantee. Nothing's 100%, but they will temperament test dogs. They'll put them in foster homes to see if they're good with kids or with, other dogs or cats. But Greg won't take them if they're not completely up to date on their vaccinations. They have to have interstate travel health certificate. They have to be spayed and neutered. So, you're not getting a pig in a poke. You're usually, if you're working with a reputable rescue group, you're getting a dog that has been very carefully vetted and cared for before it makes its way north.
Is there sort of a quick way to discuss why, let's say, for example, in Texas or Louisiana, or even parts of California, definitely,
there isn't a strong culture in certain parts of the country of spaying and neutering? But I always then would ask the question, but why not? Why is it that in certain parts of the country, people aren't getting the importance of spaying and neutering as a way of keeping down the population? It's complex. It's got some of it's economic, some of it's social, cultural. There's even a political aspect of the problem. What I heard from Southerners, and I tried to elicit answers to this question from Southerners, and part of it is just an attitude about dogs. And this is not uniform. I don't want to paint it with too broad a brush. But so many Southerners said to me, down here, what you hear so often is people will say, quote unquote, it's just a dog, which means it's disposable, it's dispensable. It's just a dog, so it doesn't deserve the kind of attention, love, care, and compassion that we might reserve for people. People, look, there are a lot of Southerners who take great care of their dogs. In parts of the South, there is a view that dogs are property and people don't want to be told, how to take care of them. They don't want the state telling them they can't travel with a hunting dog in the back of a pickup truck that isn't secured in a kennel, for example.
Right.
It's just a dog. Why are you so worried about it?
Right. Rescue Road, New York Times bestseller, Amazon bestseller. How has the response been, let's say, for the book?
Well, it's been great. I was thoroughly surprised and happy, of course, when the publisher called me to tell me it had made one of the New York Times bestseller lists. I really wasn't prepared for that. People would say, well, what do you really want to come of this book? And I would say, and maybe this is a generational thing, I don't know how many people remember this book, but I said I want it to be the Silent Spring of dog rescue. And Silent Spring, of course, was Rachel Carson's book written, I think, in the late 1950s about the impact of the pesticide DDT on the environment. It was sort of the book that's credited with being the sort of the starting gun of the environmental movement in the United States. And that's a very lofty and ambitious goal, to compare my book or to hope that my book will have the kind of impact that Silent Spring did. But that is my fondest hope for it. That it'll really open people's eyes to the great need out there. And I just want people, if they are thinking of getting a dog, think rescue.
How did the whole experience from Albie to spending time with Greg Mahle, how did it change you?
Wow, it's really changed my life in a lot of ways. I mean, as I said earlier, I was very resistant for so long to getting a dog, even though I had a dog growing up as a kid. I just thought it was going to be too much work, and I was going to have to worry about who was going to take care of the dog. And we went away, and since we live in Boston, I wasn't eager to walk on ice sheets at 5 a.m. so a dog could do its business.
Right.
But I think it forces you. I mean, I think of myself as a fairly compassionate person in general, I guess, but wasn't even prepared, I guess, for how much I would love Albie. Or how much I felt like I would want to nurture him. When I finally agreed to get a dog, my youngest child was going to be a senior in high school. And I think maybe a part of it was I wasn't really ready to have an empty nest and be done nurturing. And, a dog, no matter how old it is, it's kind of like a chronic 4-year-old. And it's a wonderful age. And one of the nice things I've found is that even as dogs reach adolescence, they don't roll their eyes at you when you talk to them like you're kids. So there's something about that unvarnished, unconditional love you get from a dog that just, I don't know, it's just a wonderful feeling.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Maybe just talk about you yourself, Peter Zheutlin growing up and down the road becoming a writer. What was that journey like?
It was a journey without any blueprint or plan. I grew up in suburban New Jersey, not too far from New York City. I had one younger brother. My dad was a pediatrician. My mom, she was not just a housewife. She also was, a little bit later in our life, worked as an educator at a community college. Mm-hmm. She was always very active in politics. It was a fairly traditional upbringing in the New Jersey suburbs. I sort of came of age in the 60s, then went off to college, came up to New England to go to college, and not really sure of what I wanted to do, which I think has been true in all the decades since. Got out of college, went to work for my congressman for 1 year, then went to law school. Still uncertain of what I wanted to do. Had a brief and non-illustrious career in the law for a few years, and then gradually drifted off to work in the nonprofit sector. And that's really when I started writing. I went to work for an organization called the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was my timing was quite good. I went to work there in June of 1985, and in the fall of that year, the organization was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So it instantly got huge visibility.
All thanks to you, of course.
Yes, I have to say there was no cause and effect relationship. I got to surf that wave and go to Oslo, which is where the Peace Prize is given. It's the only one of the Nobel Prizes that's not given in Stockholm. Spent about 8 years traveling all over the world working on nuclear disarmament issues. It was still the height of the Cold War. I was traveling to the Soviet Union and, far-flung parts of the Soviet Union, such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and got to travel around Europe and Japan, and it was very fulfilling work. Finally, I was working on, a cause that I really felt strongly about. And while I was there, I started writing op-ed pieces on issues related to nuclear disarmament. I just got a kick out of it, and got a kick out of, having a byline and knowing that people were reading things that I wrote. It was kind of exciting, and that's sort of what got the ball rolling in terms of wanting to move a little bit more in the direction of being a writer or journalist. It kind of took off from there.
Would you consider yourself more of a second career writer?
It was a second career, and I think that it's very few people, and that actually applies to me too. No matter how, it's like acting. There are a few actors at the top who obviously do quite well and are very successful, and there are some writers, Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code, and others become quite successful and wealthy from writing. I would not go into it for that reason. It's not an easy way to try and make a living. I mean, even I couldn't have done it without also having some clients for whom I've done some work, and I've also collaborated on a couple of books with other people. You become a sort of paid consultant. So it's not the easiest way to make a living, and you really have to be passionate about it. You have to stick with it. It's a chicken and egg problem. Everybody wants to know, well, have you published anything before they want to publish anything you've written? And, well, how do you get published if you don't have anything that's already published? You just have to keep at it. There's an old adage, people say, write what you know. I actually would take a little bit of exception with that. I would say write what you're really curious to know. And Rescue Road's a really good example. I knew nothing about the dog rescue world at all, but I was so curious to find out because I was living that experience with Albie. I wanted to know how Albie had come to us and, what his life was like before he came to us. So it's what I was curious to know that drove the book. It is something that you have to have a passion for it, and I think you have to write about things that you really feel passionate about, which isn't to say that you can't get started by, if you're a young person just out of school, taking a job on a local newspaper just to get your feet wet and, know what it's like to write under a deadline, or know what it's like to have an editor turn something back to you that looks unrecognizable and then put you under pressure to to make it better. I mean, I think it's a life that a lot of people glamorize, but there's a lot of tedium and kind of grudge work that goes into it too.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, the words just don't come out of your head.
For some people, it's an easier task than others. My first book, for example, was quite an amazing story, but it also came to me quite fortuitously. Back in the early 90s, my mother received a letter from a complete stranger who was researching the story of the first woman to bicycle around the world. This was back in 1894, 1895. And his research had led him to conclude that my mother was a distant descendant of this woman. My mother had no clue what he was talking about. I looked at the letter, which was accompanied by a couple of newspaper articles from the 1890s about this woman. What was clear from his letter was that my mother was in fact related to this woman, but we had no knowledge through the family or otherwise about this story. And it sat in my file cabinet for about 10 years. And I decided 10 years later to take another look, because it seemed like, why didn't anybody in my family know this story? It sounded rather remarkable. A woman riding around the world on a bicycle in the 1890s. One thing led to another, and I was on her trail. Tracked her all over the world because she was an incredible self-promoter, and she managed to generate, in an era when, we live in an era now when anybody can have a voice on the internet.
That's right.
But in the 1890s, for a woman no less, to generate worldwide publicity for a bicycle trip around the world was quite an accomplishment. It turned out she was a married woman with 3 small children when she made the trip. It became a genealogical exercise because I tracked down her only living direct descendants, who were a distant cousin of mine, cobbled together, really kind of resurrected from the dustbin of history, this incredible story of this very outlandish, flamboyant woman way ahead of her time who got on a bicycle in June of 1894 in Boston and didn't return for 15 months. It would have been a radical thing for a mother of 3 young children to do in 2015.
Absolutely.
You can imagine in 1894 what a radical notion it was. Again, a story that kind of fell into my lap, consumed 4 years of my life, but it was one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done. It was like a great scavenger hunt.
Right. If people want to look up that work, what's the full title?
I don't know that it's still in print. It goes back to 2007, but there are used copies available through Amazon. It's called Around the World on 2 Wheels, Annie Londonderry's Extraordinary Ride.
Going back to animal rescue, you really observed a lot of folks. One theme that came out for me reading your wonderful book, Rescue Road, was the endless number of hours people spend. Not just Greg Mahle on the road, but this unknown, unsung band of heroes. One of the topics that does come up is what they call compassion fatigue. You address it yourself in the work. Could you maybe give folks a perspective on what you see?
Wow, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I can tell you that when I spend time, for example, with this woman, Carrie Toth, who was our adoption coordinator for Albie, she works with the Central Louisiana Alliance for Animals. Her life and the life of so many people like Carrie is absolutely an endless series of running around and errands and taking care of dogs and finding foster homes, bringing dogs to vets, putting them up on Pet Finder, their profiles, matching them with foster homes or permanent homes, patrolling dumpster sites in rural Louisiana for stray dogs or puppies that have been discarded in dumpsters, walking through the hallways of shelters and literally sometimes having to decide which dogs they can save and which ones they can't, knowing that those that they can't are going to be euthanized. So these folks, they're happy for every dog they save, but for every dog they save, there are countless dogs left behind. And they literally are haunted by the ones that they've had to look at and say, I can't take you. I can't take you. I don't have room for one more. And it's heartbreaking work day in and day out. Many of these folks like Carrie have exhausted bank accounts. They've put their marriages at risk. They've missed their kids' soccer games and birthday parties because they're very driven and committed to the work. Obviously some people are better at drawing boundaries around this than others, but it takes enormous sacrifice and enormous heart to do this kind of work. And as I said, many of these folks will never be known, even to the people who, they may save a dog, but they will never meet. The families who adopt these dogs will never meet them, which I should mention is one of the reasons that Greg Mahle documents every one of his rescue road trips on Facebook. It's not just for you, the adopter, so you can follow your dog as it makes its way north. It's also a way for people like Carrie and the other folks who have invested so much of themselves to save these dogs to vicariously participate in Gotcha Day. They may never see the happy endings that they had such an important role in creating, but through Greg's Facebook posts, at least they too can follow the journeys of the dogs that they've cared for and loved and put on their way. So I just came away with such a feeling of enormous respect because there's nothing in it for them other than the satisfaction of helping save a dog.
Yeah.
And they also know that the problem is so big, it's just about saving one more dog. They don't feel like they're getting a handle on the bigger problem. The numbers are too overwhelming. As Greg often says, I'm moving these dogs from south to north, but it's like moving grains of sand off the beach, one grain of sand at a time. He'll say, I know I'm not solving the big problem, I'm not changing the world, but for this dog, I'm changing the world. Mm-hmm. And for this family getting this dog, the world has changed. The sacrifices are really quite extraordinary.
Right. Greg drives 26 times a year, 4,000-mile trip.
Yep.
He has saved by now he's saved tens of thousands of dogs.
He personally has driven more than 30,000 dogs north.
That's right.
I don't know that we mentioned it, but, Greg is married. He has a stepson who I believe is now 12. Mm. He has to say goodbye to his wife every other Monday, and they're apart for a week.
Yeah.
It's an enormous sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's hard for him to say goodbye. They have a very strong, close marriage, which I've observed close up. And it's hard to be away from home half your life. But it's been their life together. And his wife, Adela, is a very important part of rescue road trips, as is Greg's mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. It's really just a little family operation. It's now a nonprofit operation. And it's all done on a shoestring and a prayer.
Yeah.
I mean, he does charge, we should mention, he does charge to transport dogs, but the expenses are so high.
Right.
Of running a rig like this, and the time involved is so great that he's basically working for minimum wage when he's got a full load, and he has to have 55 dogs on the trip just to break even. And sometimes, even though there's a never-ending supply of dogs that need to come north, the truck isn't always full. But something, if he's only got 40 reservations and he needs 55 to break even, he still makes the trip.
I would consider myself an average person. If you were going to imagine an average person, mm-hmm. And you were going to ask him or her to do exactly what Greg does, how many weeks or months before we would just quit?
Harold, I've seen people comment on stories about Greg online, talking about how he's raking it in, charging $185 per dog. Because they do this simple mathematical calculation. They think, whoa, if he's got 80 dogs and it's twice a month, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars floating around. They have no idea how much the rig costs, how much the fuel costs, what it costs to replace the clutch, how many tires he goes through, how many hours he has to work. I mean, I wouldn't begrudge him if he made a handsome living doing this, given the sacrifices involved, but I've done the math. He's in desperate need of a new tractor trailer. I met him in Rhode Island last week on his last trip before Christmas, and sections of the roof were starting to peel off the trailer. And when he got home to Ohio, he sent me pictures when he got it into the shop, and literally parts of the roof were coming off. And my wife started an online fundraiser. If you go to YouCaring.com, that's Y-O-U Caring, YouCaring.com, and enter Rescue Road Trips Tractor Trailer, you'll see that we've launched a fundraiser to try and raise $200,000 so Greg can get a new rig and not be saddled with enormous debt, that he has to pay off. Just before Christmas, we had raised a little over $70,000.
Woo!
We've got a little bit more to go. And if we raise more than that, we will put that extra money towards fuel or towards future maintenance on the new rig. What I think is particularly impressive about this, we've gotten more than 700 individual donors have contributed. Many of them are people who adopted dogs that were brought north by Greg, many of them have just been touched by what he does. He has engendered a community around rescue road trips of people who just love him. And anyone who's picked up a dog from Greg will tell you he's an angel or a hero or both. You know, for an operation like this to have touched so many lives, and now people have a chance to say thank you back to Greg by getting him a new tractor trailer, I just think speaks volumes about who he is and the kind of person he is. It's very moving, and it couldn't be happening to a nicer guy.
That's amazing. Of course, thank you to your wife, too, for starting the campaign.
Greg helped change our life, and he's changed so many others.
Here's one final question on the book. Why do you think Greg does what he does?
Oh, I think I know why he does what he does. He told me the story about the first stray dog he ever brought home as a kid, and what a great feeling it was to help this stray dog. And he said, that's the feeling I'm always trying to recapture. It just makes him feel good to do this work. You know, he'll tell you that little world inside the trailer where he really, over the course of a week, seems to bond with the dogs. It's almost like you see a pack forming. He just, like he'll say, I'm in this work because I want to see the dogs and I want to pat their heads. And a lot of people will tell you they don't care about money, but few people can really back that up. I really think Greg backs that up because he could have a much easier life on the road, a much more lucrative life, driving bottled water or automobile parts, you know, from coast to coast. But he chooses to transport dogs that need to get out of the trailer for walks. It's him and one other guy with 80 dogs. Those dogs need to be walked. If it's 100 degrees in East Texas or 0 degrees in Virginia in February, those dogs need to get out. They need to be walked. He's got the hopes and dreams of the families riding on his shoulders. He knows he's got 80 dogs, hard luck dogs, lucky to be on his truck. That's a huge responsibility. There are a lot of less stressful ways to make a better living than doing this, but he just loves dogs.
We want to say thank you to Peter Zheutlin for sharing his story and, of course, writing Rescue Road, which I consider required reading for anybody in animal rescue. We also want to say thank you to Peter's wife, Judy Gelman, for starting the YouCaring site. If you want to learn more about Peter and Rescue Road, go to our show notes at thisispawprint.com/11. If you want to learn more about me and Nancy, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Look for This Is Pawprint, all one word. If you want to hear more episodes of Pawprint, you can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. Those are the two most popular places. Go to thisispawprint.com/iTunes or thisispawprint.com/SoundCloud. We want to say thank you to all of you, our listeners out there, for inspiring us with your stories and spreading a positive message of peace and love by saving an animal. Have a great day, and see you next time on Pawprint.
Pawprint is a production of EVER Education.
You can handle the truth!
Woohoo!